Cities Church of Christ. We are so glad you're here. Whether you're a member or a visitor, we're glad you've joined us. Hey, many of you have asked how you can help during this time, and there is a project that's been put together by some of the staff, and the details of that will come later in the service. You'll want to watch through the whole service to get those details. I mean, you'll want to watch the whole service anyways. It's all good stuff, but you'll want to know how to help, so stay tuned as that project is coming. I hope that this time apart is not going to be much longer. I miss your faces when you sing. I miss hearing that sound when we're all together. And I hope that we can be soon. But in the meantime, God is still God and he deserves to be worshiped. So sing out. We're going to sing, we're going to pray, we're going to take communion as we always do. We'll hear a message from God's word. We're glad you're here. Now let's worship.
Once I was lost, wandering in darkness, no life inside, no hope in sight. He called my name and healed my blindness, set me ablaze. Now I'm alive with His love, breaking through my heart of stone. Love breathing to wake my bones. Love reaching out to save my soul. Love never gonna let me go. And now my heart, so full of worship, I can't hold back, I can't contain it, for all He's done, Jesus my Savior. I am ablaze and full of thanks for His love breaking through my heart of stone. Love breathing to wake my bones. Love reaching out to save my soul. Love never gonna let me go. Love calling me as I am. Love making me new again. Love lifting me when I can't. Love never gonna let me go. Wherever you've been, whatever you've done, come as you are, come in His open arms. Wherever you've been, whatever you've done, come as you are. Come find His love breaking through my heart of stone. Love breathing to wake my bones. Love reaching out to save my soul. Love never gonna let me go. Love calling me as I am. Love making me new again. Love lifting me when I can't. Love never gonna let me go. Love breaking through my heart of stone. Love breathing to wake my bones. Love reaching out to save my soul. Love never gonna let me go. Love calling me as I am. Love making me new again. Love lifting me when I can't. Love never gonna let me go. Love never gonna let me go. Love never gonna let me go. If the skies above you are gray, you are feeling so blue. If your cares and burdens seem great all the whole day through, there's a silver light that shines in the heavenly land. Look by faith and see it, my friend. Trust in His promises grand.
Sing and you'll be happy today. Press along to the goal. Trust in Him who leadeth the way. He is King of soul. Let the world know where you belong. Look to Jesus and pray.
Lift your voice and praise Him in song. Sing and be happy today. Often we are troubled and tired, sick with sorrow and pain. There are others living in sin, blessed with earthly gain. Take new courage, we cannot tell what tomorrow may bring. When the dark clouds vanish away, then your heart truly can sing.
Sing and you'll be happy today. Press along to the goal. Trust in Him who leadeth the way. He will keep your soul. Let the world know where you belong. Look to Jesus and pray.
Lift your voice and praise Him in song. Sing and be happy today. Oft we fail to see the rainbow up in heaven's fair sky, when it seems the fortunes of earth frown and pass us by. There are things we know that are worth more than silver and gold. If we hope and trust Him each day, we shall have pleasure untold.
Sing and you'll be happy today. Press along to the goal. Trust in Him who leadeth the way. He is King of soul. Let the world know where you belong. Look to Jesus and pray.
Lift your voice and praise Him in song. Sing and be happy today.
Good morning, everyone. We're so glad that you joined us this morning for worship. We are ready to go over our 10 Commandments. Are you ready to join us? Warm up your fingers and let's begin. Number 1, put God first. Number 2, praise and worship Him only. Number 3, keep God's name holy. Number 4, keep the Lord's Day special. Number 5, obey your parents. Number 6, do not harm anyone. Number 7, love the one you marry. Number 8, do not take anything that's not yours. Number 9, tell the truth. And finally, number 10, don't be jealous of what others have. Excellent job, you guys! Now today, we are focusing on number 9 of the 10 Commandments, which is tell the truth. And again, that may seem simple, but it's hard to tell the truth whenever you know that consequences might be coming, or it can be hard to hear the truth when you know that it could hurt your feelings or make you feel sad. But the important thing about telling the truth is that it takes courage to tell the truth. And normally, if you tell the truth, the consequences that would have been really, 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 really bad if you had told a lie are a lot less hard, a lot less bad for you. And if you tell a lie, in order to keep going, you have to keep telling lies. And eventually you're just left with a pile of lies and a lot of hurt feelings and damage to people's hearts when you do have to finally tell the truth. So I encourage you to be bold, to live with love and courage and tell the truth to others whenever possible. Thank you guys for joining us today. We'll see you later.
Say bye.
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 You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only, Lord. Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, so abide special day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changest not, abide with me. I need thy presence every passing hour. What but thy grace can foil the tempter's power? Who like thyself my guide and stay can be? Through cloud and sunshine, oh, abide with me. Hold thou thy cross before my closing eyes. Shine through the gloom and point me to the skies. Heaven's morning breaks and earth's faint shadows flee. In life, in death, O Lord, abide with me. In Christ alone my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are stilled, when striving cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand. In Christ alone, who took on flesh, fullness of God in helpless babe, this gift of love and righteousness, scorned by the ones he came to save, till on that cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. For every sin on him was laid. Here in the death of Christ I live, there in the ground his body lay. Light of the world by darkness slain, then bursting forth in glorious day. Up from the grave he rose again, and as he stands for victory, sin's curse has lost its grip on me. For I am his, and he is mine, bought with the precious blood of Christ. No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me, from life's first cry to final breath. Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck me from his hand, till he returns or calls me home. Here in the power of Christ I'll stand.
Good morning, church family. I hope everyone is doing well during this time. The Golke family definitely misses everyone, and we cannot wait to get together again soon. As we prepare our minds for communion, I wanted to read a verse out of Revelations chapter 3, verse 20. It says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with them and they with me." That verse actually popped up on my Bible app, daily scripture on my phone yesterday, and it just really clicked with me. It really hit me that the past several months has been very limited with our time together with friends and family. Our dinner tables have been empty. The restaurants have been empty. We haven't been able to dine with our Christian friends and our families. But this verse gives me hope that Jesus is always here, no matter what, quarantined or not, self-isolation or not, social distancing or not. Jesus is always knocking at that door. He wants us to open it and let him in. Whether or not you've been at this for 50 or 60 years, whether or not you're new to Christianity, or whether or not you have no clue what's going on, I pray that this verse gives us a little bit of hope that wherever we're at in our lives, wherever we're at with our walk with Christ, that he is always there, ready for us to open that door and let him in. As we take communion this morning, I pray that we remember what Jesus did for us on the cross, that he gave up his life, that he gave up his blood so that we may be free and that we may all eat together one day in heaven. Pray with me, and then you may take communion with your family. Dear God, I thank you so much for today, for another day that we may open our eyes, another day that we can log on to YouTube and watch church and take communion together with our church family and friends. Thank you for your son, Jesus, for his blood, for his body that he gave up for us. I thank you that he is always here, that he is always knocking on the door, waiting for us to open it up so that he may eat with us. Lord, we love you and we thank you and we trust you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck me from his hand till he returns or calls me home. Here in the power of Christ I'll stand.
I can help.
I can help.
I can help.
I can help. I can help.
I can help.
I can help.
No.
I can help.
No, we can help.
I can help. I can help. I can help.
Hey, Lake Cities family, we're so glad that we could join you today to tell you about an exciting opportunity. We know many of you have been looking for ways to reach out to help those who are less fortunate, especially during this COVID crisis. And so we want to tell you about a great opportunity to serve those in need.
That's right, Jeff. Starting Monday, May 25th through Friday, May 29th, we are going to be collecting non-perishable food items. So what you can do is collect them at your house, ask your friends, ask your neighbors to come and bring non-perishable food items to your house, and we can come and pick those up for you.
That's right. Like Luke said, you can collect them for your community, and then we will come pick them up, or you can come drop them off up at the church building.
All of this is to benefit Philip's Wish, Roanoke Food Pantry, and the community storehouses, all great organizations that reach out to the least fortunate among us. We're also going to send you a virtual flyer, something that you can put up on your Facebook page and tell your neighbors that you're a place where they can drop off those canned food items. And then again, you do not have to get out and deliver them. We will come to you. We will come and pick them up. And say it with me. Everybody ready? I can help. And have we got a great opportunity for you?
That's right, Jeff. Starting Monday, May 25th through Friday. Why did you laugh? You knew I was going to say it.
Hey, Lake Cities, Jeff, Luke, and Leah coming at you with a great opportunity. Why would you do that? Well, good morning and welcome back to our sermon series on the Ten Commandments. We are quickly approaching the end of this series that I've really enjoyed. I hope it's been a blessing to you. If you have your Bibles this morning, turn to Matthew chapter 5. We'll have those verses on the screen so that you can follow along. But this morning we're talking about truth. And maybe you've noticed it or maybe you haven't noticed it, but all my sermon titles for this series have had something to do with song lyrics or song titles, and this one's no different. But I was reminded of a song from a terrible, terrible movie. And when I say terrible, I mean unequivocally terrible. Like, everyone hated this movie, no one went to see it, and for some reason, when I was in high school, my friends decided it was funny. And so we watched Ishtar. It's a terrible movie starring Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty, and they're songwriters in this story. And in the movie, they write a song, and I remember the lyrics. Telling the truth can be dangerous business. Honesty and popular don't go hand in hand. If you admit that you can play the accordion, you won't get hired for a rock and roll band. Think about that this morning as we talk about what it means to tell the truth. You hear that phrase a lot. Well, let me tell you the truth. To tell the truth. And every time when somebody says, can I be honest with you? You know, you've heard me say it before. I always think, have you been lying to me up until now? Well, there's lots of phrases that we use every day that aren't really the truth. Phrases like, the check is in the mail. Or, I'll start my diet tomorrow. Could I have just a few minutes of your time? I love this one. Let's have lunch sometime. No, that dress doesn't make you look fat. My favorite of all time is, I'm here from the federal government and I'm here to help you. That's not true. Or one of the truths that were not true from my childhood was, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. I remember my dad saying that to me right before he gave me a whooping, and I deserved it and I needed it, but somewhere in my whatever-year-old brain I thought, well, give the belt to me, old man, and let's see if that's true or not. Telling the truth is dangerous business. It's difficult, it's hard, and yet as God commands his people in how to live a more holy life and how to be transformed to be like him, this is one of the cornerstone statements. Do not lie. Do not bear false witness. Do not falsely testify against your neighbor. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. That's how it reads in the NIV. But in Matthew chapter 5, and remember, we've been looking at these 10 commandments and the words of Jesus kind of hand in hand, and seeing what it means for this to live out in our Christian life and our walk of following Christ. What would it look like to not lie, to instead always tell the truth? Well, Jesus handles that in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 33. Let's read that. Again, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to simply say is yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Well, you know that passage better as just simply saying, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And if you really think about it, we live right now in a truth-starved world. Our culture, our society is starved for the truth. And you don't have to go any further than the media to find a good example of this. And I don't care which side of the aisle you're on politically. You know how the different news networks kind of cater to one side or the other. But both of them do not deal in the truth. They deal in what we call now clicks. They need you to click on. They need you to up the eyeballs that have viewed this page or watched this story. And so the truth becomes the first casualty in trying to get clicks, in trying to drum up attention. Truth is holy, though. Truth is holy because God pronounces it holy. Now remember what we've said all throughout this series is that what we're learning in the 10 Commandments is not how to keep a bunch of laws, but how to become more like the God who made us. And the God who made us is the one true God. That's going to come up a few times. But listen to how God describes himself, or how he describes Jesus in John 1. It says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of what? Full of grace and truth. Jesus, in his final hours there with his disciples, is praying to the Father, and he says, my prayer isn't that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They're not of the world, even as I'm not of the world. And then he says this in verse 17, he says, sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. Or here's Jesus standing in front of Pilate, literally giving a testimony in front of this official. And Jesus says, my kingdom's not of the world. This is John 18:38 or 36. He says, if it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. And Pilate says, well, you're a king then. And Jesus says, you say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into this world. Now think about this. If we stopped there, if we took a great big pregnant pause and said, this is it, this is Jesus telling the world why he came into the world. Jesus says simply, in order to do what? To testify to the truth. And everyone on the side of truth listens to me. And Pilate asked that great question of all philosophers and teachers, what is truth? Well, let me give you just a few ideas of what truth is this morning. Number one, I want you to hear that truth hurts. Truth isn't easy. In fact, it's much easier to tell a lie. It's more convenient. It's going to get you more jobs. It's going to get you more likes. It's going to get you more friends. It'll save you money. It'll cause you less heartache. One of my favorite writers and preachers is a guy by the name of Rick Brown. And he talks about how pain is not somehow a disproof of God. It's not a way that we would know that, well, God doesn't exist because I'm enduring pain. And he tells this great story about his kids. He's talking about one day when he and his wife were outside and they had 4 small boys. And the boys were outside playing. And then his son, Chris, who's 3 years old at the time, came and said, Matthew, his brother, had eaten some Tylenol. And so I love the way Rick writes about it. He says, we found an almost empty bottle of children's chewable Tylenol and the smell of grape flavor lacing Matthew's lips. He was breaking bad at an early age. Chris went on to tell us that he had enjoyed a few himself, and so did some other boys. And the next thing he knew, we had strapped our young druggies in their car seats, and we were on the way to the emergency room, and the doctor had to take some blood samples from each child. Can you imagine the pain? He had to cause pain to find out how much pain reliever was in their system. And he says, my wife, Karen, stood over to the side crying while the doctor stuck a needle in their tiny veins, and I held them, and I whispered into each of their ears, this is all Mommy's fault. I love that story because he goes on to use that as an illustration that sometimes the pain that we endure brings us to a place that we would rather be, and that we can't get to those places without first enduring the pain. Let me drop down a little bit in his writing. He says, sometime a doctor has to lead a patient through pain to bring them to health. Pain itself does not disprove his love and care, and neither does his existence in our world disprove God. Even if you choose to deny God because of suffering, because of pain, you still will suffer in this world. The only difference is you will have to deal with that suffering without God. Jesus famously tells his disciples that he is what? The way, the truth, and the life. Do you remember what the circumstances were when Jesus tells them that? It's the night before it's the night he's betrayed, the night before his crucifixion. And he says to them very famously, do not let your hearts be troubled. He says, don't worry. Why is he telling them that? Because he knows that their faith is about to be shaken. He says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. And if I'm going away, then I'm going to prepare a place. And if I go away, I'll come back for you. And Thomas, very famously, says, Lord, we don't know the way to the place where you're going. And this is where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, the way that Jesus describes here is not an easy path. In fact, it's a path that leads him to the cross. And so why would our path in following Jesus be any different than the path that Jesus took? The truth is hard. The truth hurts, as we say. The truth hurts. And so maybe a good litmus test for whether or not you're telling the truth is, are you ever finding yourself bristling a little bit? You're saying, oh, I don't really want to have to say this. Then you know you're right in the middle of God's will. You know that you're right in the middle of the place where he intends you to be, because telling the truth is difficult. It's dangerous business. Well, we've been watching lots of shows on TV during the quarantine, even before the quarantine, but the boys and I, we like watching history shows and nature shows and shows about war. And what they don't know is that they're learning while they're watching. Well, they do now because they're watching this. But there's something about watching stories about history that always evoke these images in my mind of what it's like to follow Christ. And one was from a History Network show from years back, and it talked about the building of the Alaska Highway. I love this story so much that I wrote about it a few years ago. But it was 1941. They started this project to lay a highway all across Canada and into Alaska. And then in 1942 there was the attack on Pearl Harbor, and in 1941 there was an attack on Pearl Harbor, and then in 1942 they said we've got to get this road laid to get troops and equipment and all kinds of stuff. And here's the thing about the Alaska Highway. It's 1,422 miles. Goes from Canada to Alaska. It cost at the time $138 million to build it. It required 16,000 workers. But here's how they recruited the workers. You're going to love this. I don't know how many of us would answer the ad for this job. Here's how it said. Men hired for this job will be required to work and live under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Temperatures will range from 90 degrees above zero to 70 degrees below zero. Men will have to fight swamps, rivers, ice, and cold. Mosquitoes, flies, and gnats will not only be annoying, but they will cause bodily harm. If you are not prepared to work under these and similar conditions, do not apply. And then it said in the story that often when soldiers and other workers would show up, they would report to the guy who was the foreman of the crew, and he would say, "You can sleep anywhere in any of these snowdrifts, but that snowdrift is mine." Would any of us say yes to that job? And yet so many did. It took, we said 16,000 workers, but 174 steam shovels, 374 blade graders, 904 tractors, 5,000 trucks, bulldozers, snowplows, cranes, and generators. And working in sub-zero temperatures. They worked through that frozen ground that often bent the very pickaxes that they used to break it up. When Jesus says he's the way, the truth, and the life, he says you need to understand that when you come to follow me, we all pick up a cross. That the way of Jesus, the path of Jesus, leads us all to our own self-denial, to our own crosses to bear. So Jesus is saying that he's not necessarily going to make a way through your illness so that you'll be healed. He's not saying that he's going to make a way through your joblessness so that you're going to have no need for money, that you'll have a job next week. He's not saying that he's going to make a way through your relationship struggles so that your marriage is renewed this weekend after this one meeting with a counselor. The most important way Jesus makes is a way to deeper intimacy with God. The commandments of God were always leading us to a deeper knowledge, to a deeper intimacy, to a better understanding of who God is and who he wants us to be and who he created us to be. Jesus is making a way through whatever we are facing so that the result will be that we are transformed to be closer and more like God the Father. Jesus may have a different destination in mind than what we have in mind. And when we hit difficult times, the destination we want to reach is one where there's no more difficulty. And Jesus never promises that. Jesus is the way. His destination is better. It's deeper. It's more profitable. It's better for us in the long run, but it is a long run. Jesus makes that statement to Judas, who's going to betray him, to Peter, who's going to deny him, to John, who's about to abandon him, to his disciples, who will all one day lose their lives for following him. And so when Jesus says he's the way, the truth, and the life, his way leads us often to death so that we will find life ultimately. So truth is hard. but who is the truth for? Notice what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount there. He says, when you make oaths, and this was a practice of, well, if I can make an oath on something other than the Lord, then I don't have to keep that oath. It was a way of finding or writing a loophole into contracts. But going back to the Ten Commandments, God says you should not bear false witness against your neighbor. And if you're like me, if you're a bit of a lawyer, right? If you have that mentality in your mind, you say, well, what do you mean by neighbor? Because surely you don't mean people who cheat me, or people who are rude to me, or people who are from another country, or people whose maybe our laws don't apply to them, and so I can circumvent having to tell the truth there. Bad news. The word that God uses for neighbor is everybody. It's everyone. In Leviticus 19, I want you to look at this. I want you to, we're going to put it up on the screen, because I want you to read very carefully. Leviticus has ended more daily Bible readers than I think any other book in the Bible. And so God is writing here, he says, in Leviticus 19, he says, do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another. That's verse 11. That sounds an awful lot like what we've been reading, right? Do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another. And then look at this. Do not swear falsely by my name, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of hired workers overnight. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. I am the Lord. He goes on and on and on until verse 18, and then you're going to recognize a statement of God that's repeated on the lips of Jesus. He says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And if we respond to that by asking who is our neighbor, then it reveals something about our heart. It's saying that maybe the truth is just reserved for people that we love or people that deal honestly with us. It's reflexive. And God says, no. Truth is owed to everyone you come in contact with anyone you live in community with. Well, telling stories and preaching a sermon about the truth, I don't think would be complete without talking about Abraham Lincoln, who was called Honest Abe. And in that book I've been reading by Rick Ashley, he records this great story about Lincoln. He says, when he was 24 years old, Abraham Lincoln served as the postmaster of New Salem, Illinois, for which he received a yearly salary of, get this, $55.70. The New Salem post office was closed in 1836, but it was several years before an agent arrived from Washington to settle all the accounts and to make sure all the books were even. At that time, Abraham Lincoln was a struggling lawyer who actually needed some money. The agent informed him that $17 was due to the government. Lincoln got up, walked across his room, opened an old trunk, and took out a yellow cotton rag bound with a string. He untied it and he spread out the cloth, and there, sure enough, was $17. Now think about how much $17 is if his yearly wage was $55. Lincoln had been holding on to those $17 for all of those years, and he wrote this: I never use any man's money but my own. Lincoln could have lied. He could have said it was lost. He could have blamed it on somebody else. But he showed the character that he had and that was due to all men. And maybe that has something to do with the name Honest Abe. All right, so if truth is hard and truth is for everyone, well, then what does truth look like? How is it that we can speak honestly? How can we embrace this idea of not lying? And again, I want to come back to this idea that truth, or the life of truth, the living out of truth, looks like Jesus. It looks like Jesus. It's conformed into his nature. It bears his likeness. We walk in his footsteps. John Dixon, he wrote a book called Humilitas. And it's a book based on his doctoral research. And his doctoral research was all based on honor and shame throughout history. It's a fascinating read. But in the ancient world, he finds that to suffer shame was the greatest dishonor. It inflicted the deepest hurts, the greatest harm. The average person would always choose a way that led to greater personal honor. And you can hear some of that reflected in the writings of Scripture. But Dixon writes, the most shameful and honorless place in the ancient world was where? A cross. The cross represented a way that no one in the ancient world would take, because what came with the cross was what? Degradation. Not just that you were guilty, but you were shamefully exposed in front of the whole world. And so that bore the greatest amount of shame. And yet that's the way of Jesus. The cross was the way of Jesus' followers. Christians in the ancient world began to redefine that shame as the greatest good. They started using a word, as Dixon ties it through history, the usage of this word, a word that hadn't been associated with anything good up until that time. They used a word that had always been to describe servitude or indignity or someone who was lower than. And it was the word that it's translated humility. And Dixon finds in his study of history, of world history, human history, that the word humility only became a virtue after Christians began using it. And they embraced that idea of humility. They lived that life of humility. They lived a way of service, a way of lowliness. It was unlike any other way, and it transformed not just the world, but it transformed our very use of language. And so, can I be honest with you? Can we be honest with each other today? Can I tell you the truth? The truth is, if I could tell you the truth today, you wouldn't want to hear it. You wouldn't want to hear it. Because the path that we walk with Christ is hard, it's difficult, it's painful. It doesn't promise us wealth and success. And if we were really honest today, if you were really honest with your loved ones, with your friends, with your neighbors, you would say, it's difficult to admit it, but there's places in my life, there's places in my heart where it seems like there is no way that we're not going to make it through. You're hurting in your marriage, or you're hurting in your relationship with your kids, or you're friends with someone who's lost someone, and you desperately want to say something, but you just can't find the words to say it. You're watching someone you love be attacked by a disease, and there's no good prognosis in sight. I could go on, but we get it. When we live in a world of truth, we live in a world of pain. I want to ask you to do just a few things this morning in light of the truth. They all start with the same word. They all start with the word trust. Trust that God will make a way through. Trust that God's way is right, that it's based in the truth, that He is the one true God. That's why in those commandments, even in Leviticus 19, He says, I am the Lord. Trust that someone else in our church, in our body of believers, will be there for you, will pray with you, will walk this path, this difficult, hard path with you. Trust that if Jesus is present in our sufferings, that the result that He's going to bring about is not that He's going to make everything better, but He'll make everything deeper. That your relationship with God will be deeper, that your understanding of your brother, of your sister, of your spouse, of your kids will be better and deeper than it would be if you didn't suffer through those painful times. Trust Jesus and humble yourself and take on that path of humility and follow Him into a life of obedience and service and caring for others. We started this sermon with a video that's pretty fun to watch. And what we're saying to the world is, as followers of Christ, we not just want to help, but we can help. And so I hope that this week you'll embrace the opportunity to serve some people. Folks that, to be honest, nobody's going to write any news stories about. Nobody's going to celebrate us on the 10 o'clock news. for bringing soup and pasta to people who have no home. But doesn't that look more like the way of Jesus than most of what you see on the 10 o'clock news? Oh, this week, let's embrace the truth that we know God and God knows us, and we follow him into a life of service. Let's do that together. God bless you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you had a great morning. I know I did, and I hope to see you soon. God bless.
Come find his love breaking through my heart of stone. Love breathing to wake my bones. Love reaching up to save my soul. Love never gonna let me go. Love calling me as I am. Love making me new again. Love lifting me when I can't. Love never gonna let me go. Love breaking through my heart of stone. Love breathing to wake my bones. Love reaching up to save my soul. Love never gonna let me go. Love calling me as I am. Love making me new again. Love lifting me when I can't. Love never gonna let me go. Love never gonna let me go. Love never gonna let